I, a researcher at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, Prabhav एवं नीति अनुसंधान संस्थान नई दिल्ली, extend my warmest welcome to you all at IMPRI Web Policy Learning. Today marks the 5th day of Ending Gender-Based Violence, Cohort 3, Challenges and Responses, an online national autumn school program, a 4-week online immersive certificate training course. This program is organized by the Gender Impact Studies Center at IMPRI, New Delhi. The chair of the program, Professor Vibhuti Patelji, visiting
Namaste.
distinguished professor, IMPRI. The conveners for the program are Advocate Dr. Shalu Nigamji, visiting senior fellow, IMPRI, advocate, author, and researcher on gender and human rights. Professor Gumari Sridevi ji, visiting professor, IMPRI. Dr. Simi Mehta ji, CEO and editorial director, IMPRI. Dr. Arjun Kumar ji, director, IMPRI, New Delhi. Proceeding further, I heartily welcome you all to the third cohort of Ending Gender-Based Violence, Challenges and Responses. Your valuable time and energy and contributions toward addressing and engaging with this critical challenge are sincerely appreciated. We have also shared the course outline and reading resources via email for your reference and perusal. Before we start today's session, here are some housekeeping rules. It is imperative that you join the meeting on time. There will be a Q&A session after each presentation. Share your questions in Q&A box and not in the chat box. The questions must not be posted as an anonymous attendee. Ensure that your questions are precise. Refrain from making general comments in the question to save time. To begin the day, I would like to invite our chair, Professor Vibhuti Patelji, for her opening remarks.
Yeah. Thank you, Avi. First of all, I would like to offer my heartfelt thanks to Dr. Arjun Kumar, Dr. Simi Mehta, Ms. Priyanka Negi, Ms. Vaishali Singh, Mr. Satyam Tripathi, and Ms. Stuti and moderator Avi Sharma. Welcome, Ms. Anuradha Kapoor and Dr. Suneha Kandpal, today's expert. A brief recap of what all has transpired in the previous sessions. We began day one with an overview on contribution of women's movement in building campaign against gender-based violence, interventions to provide institutional support to survivors of gender-based violence, and enactment of series of progressive legislations to address the issue. And also, my presentation was also talking about the rape culture prevailing in our society that has created existential crisis for women, girls, children, and gender minorities. The keynote address was given by Advocate Flavia Agnes, a veteran feminist, who answered the questions raised by the agitation by profiling efforts of the women's movement, and in a chronological order, she shared the experiences of feminist interventions right from 1980s and collectively confronting violence against gender-based violence, both in the public domain and private realm. She talked about sexual violence, domestic violence, dowry murders, the whole genesis of the Protection of Women from Domestic Violence Act 2005, providing civil and preventive remedies, court procedures, struggle against sex-selective abortion, sexual harassment at workplace, and functioning of internal committees, the limitations the internal committees face, and especially the local complaints committee. She also talked about certain laws which were also hard won by women's movement, such as glorification of Sati Act 1987. And she concluded with a powerful message that it is our duty to give support and hope to survivors through our action, collectively as well as individually. Day two, we had a very powerful presentation by Dr. Keerthi, who started with an affirmation that we should be able to raise our voice against gender-based violence. Women's movement against GBV is a second freedom struggle. She called it a second freedom struggle for dignity, respect, freedom for women, freedom of women, children, and sexual minorities from gender-based violence. She mentioned about the role Gulabi gang played, like women wearing pink saris responded collectively against beating, torture, and murders of women in their matrimonial homes. She asked, why do we need women's collectives? And she herself answered, and she said that to fight for the human rights, build solidarity, and address inequalities existing in our gender relations. She narrated practical work of women empowerment done by her organization, Vasavya Mahila Mandal, of which she is the president. And she said that, and I quote, "I am a survivor of domestic violence for 7 years and overcame social stigma, got out of violent situations, and now I am supporting thousands of survivors of gender-based violence through building grassroots movements, conducting study circles and mentoring young volunteers, organizing women's sport, and also dealing with the formal institutions." And she was proud to declare that in 1969, Vasavya Mahila Mandal, that was formed by 3 women, one of which was her mother. And she talked about the stories of women's self-mobilization through self-help groups. And also, she said that it is not only just taking up the issue of gender-based violence in isolation, but also ensuring public provisioning of water, sanitation, health, and food security. That only can help the survivors to rebuild their life. She recommended 7 strategies for empowerment of women in terms of relationship building, strengthening services for women, poverty reduction, safety for women, challenging abuse of adolescents, transform the mindset and attitude of people, public health intervention for teenage pregnancies to address teenage pregnancies. And she emphasized that human rights approach for scaling up prevention of gender-based violence is very important. The video screening of her organization, Mahila Mitra, was very, very powerful, very, very, very energizing and inspiring. And she said, "No silence for violence." That is how she ended her presentation. She also talked about the collaboration of Vasavya Mahila Sangatna with the National Institute of Rural Development, State Institute of Rural Development, Ashas and Anganwadi workers. And they said, we need to build the bridges. So she also ended and concluded her speech with the quotation from Mahatma Gandhi: "It is good to swim in waters of tradition, but to sink in them is suicide." Quote complete. We had a very important presentation by Dr. Albertina Almeida. Hers was a very well documented and erudite presentation on sexual harassment at workplace, challenges and responses. And she also brought in, her lecture was historically rooted in women's rights movement in India. And she walked the participants through history of laws against sexual harassment. And she also deconstructed the whole question of the eve teasing and violating honor of women, the kind of terminologies with the old laws were using to explain sexual harassment. And she gave some of the landmark judgments and landmark cases she discussed with Bhavari Devi or Rupandev Bajaj, Nirbhaya tragedy, and she also spoke quite empathetically about the Me Too movement. And she ended with the question of the Women in Cinema Collective and their work and the Justice Hema Committee report, which had come out around that time only. And what we see is that we have now another day 4, we had Yagna Parmar from Vacha. She spoke about empowering adolescent girls and how Vacha is addressing the issue of violence against adolescent girls, especially the natal violence, which is a priority because that is which creates the hurdles. And she said that ab nahi to kab, and she also said that the girls in their organization, they said nothing without us, nothing about us without us. And she also talked about the partnership of Vacha with other feminist organizations in city of Mumbai, such as Majlis and Suneha and Childline, to fight gender-based violence. And the Basti level community-based work, she also showed a film of Vacha, how they are building confidence and mentoring young boys and girls. And she emphasized the importance of having dialogue with the boys is very, very important to combat gender-based violence. We also had a very important presentation by Dr. Indira Chakravarty, who had used the methodology of a witness seminar. She invited all those who were involved in the campaign against pre-birth elimination of girls in Maharashtra. And she had a day-long seminar where she was recording whatever the doctors and women's rights activists and technocrats and radiologists who all slowly and gradually joined the campaign against the pre-birth elimination of girls. And she walked through the discussion very, very systematically, where in the 70s, intellectuals were supporting sex determination and sex-selective abortion in the name of choice, the formation of Forum Against Sex Determination, Sex Pre-Selection. By 88, we started forming the question of sex determination in our to stop the non-medical use of medical technology, and also the national level campaign that also flourished in 1990, PNDT Act, which we got the National Act, and then public interest litigation filed by Dr. Sabu George, Sehat and Masoom, and the census results of 2001 that also provided the trigger to come up with the PCPNDT Act. So the range of concerns about right from that the feminist movement had, that aren't we becoming anti-abortionists, or women are getting penalized for visiting diagnostic center? Can we allow victim to be further victimized? And how do we regulate the medical practitioners? So she ended with saying that India lives in several centuries at the same time. And from visible murder to sanitized elimination of girls by highly trained medical professionals who exploited patriarchal social values for commercial gain through sex tests. And she said that we need to address this commercialized medical health care ecosystem. And this is how on day 4, Advocate Celine Thomas spoke on the acid attacks on women, which are social, legal, and medical aspects. And today, on day 5, we have equally important experts, Ms. Anuradha Kapoor and Dr. Suneha Kandpal. Over to IMPRI.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for the review of the past few days. Without further ado, I would like to invite Ms. Anuradha Kapoor ji, founder and managing trustee, Swayam. She will present her talk on support services to survivors of violence against women and girls. Welcome, ma'am. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Let me just share the PowerPoint. Give me a second. So thank you very much, and Vibhuti also for updating us on what has already happened, what has already been talked about. And it's very clear that everything is really interrelated. And I'm sure that, you know, when the discussions were happening, as I heard, there was already some discussion around support services and how we need to help survivors. So I just wanted to thank IMPRI and you for asking me to speak here. And I want to say that I will be speaking on my experience as working with survivors of violence for the last 29, almost 30 years. And at the outset, I wanted to say that, you know, there's no set way of dealing or providing support to survivors of violence, their children and their families, because, you know, violence impacts not only women, but also their children and families. So what I thought I'll do today is maybe just talk a little bit about the impact that violence has on women and their children, and then link the services that we provide to that. And also to say that the services are not like a bag that you say, okay, these are the services, but they differ and they depend on each woman's individual circumstance. So, you know, I thought we'll just talk about, I'm sure you all have already spoken about, you know, the different forms of violence that women are facing, emotional, physical, sexual, economic, different forms. And I'm not going to go into details of the forms because I'm assuming that has been discussed earlier. And that one thing which we need to keep in mind is that women across class, caste, religions, educational backgrounds face violence. And oftentimes...
7 to 8.
Sorry? And what we usually a lot of people will say, even yesterday I was at a place where people say it happens to others, but actually it happens across the board in all families across backgrounds. So we need to be very clear that, you know, the interventions also have to be geared towards women and where they come from. So they have to be really linked in that way. So I just wanted to speak a little bit in detail about the impact of violence on women. And the mental health consequences, I think, are one of the biggest consequences that we see. And every woman who comes to us has some form of mental health impact. It could be depression, it could be anxiety. And one thing that is common across the board is lack of self-confidence, lack of self-esteem, mental stress, and often depression and suicidal tendencies. And, you know, the lack of confidence and self-esteem comes from the fact that they're constantly told that they're good for nothing. When violence is happening, if it is domestic violence, that's how they face it. And also if it is sexual abuse, there is a constant, you know, women don't speak out. And the women who actually speak out are at the tip of the iceberg. So we have a huge problem in terms of non-reporting, but at the same time, the impact that is happening on women is absolutely, mental health is a huge issue when we look at violence of any form. And then you look at the physical health issues. So if it is, you know, it could be anywhere, but if it is a domestic violence, it could be cuts, bruises, burns. And we've seen sexual abuse now has become, all of us are aware of the case that happened in Kolkata recently, but the brutality with which sexual abuse is happening, it's unbelievable. And I sometimes feel like as a society, I don't know what kind of men we're bringing up that can be so brutal in the way they treat women, whether they are women who are part of their homes or whether they are women who you know, they know or who they come across. So this is a huge physical impact. So, you know, what I'm looking at here is also the fact that all of this impact on women has social impact as well, right? Your medical health. If you're going to look at physical health issues, then the medical profession is going to be burdened with that. There is a cost related to that, right? So we need to look at this as a community, and I have to look at it as something that impacts each one of us, even if it has not happened to us personally. Also, we're looking at sexual and reproductive health. In these cases, you know, often if there's a pregnant woman, domestic violence, we've seen real violence against that woman. And so you have abortions, complications, menstrual disorders. It is a huge issue. And also if it is sexual abuse, then we also find a lot of the times that women either are incapable of getting into relationships, having sexual relationships, or become over, you know, compensate because they feel that, you know, something's happened to them and they were responsible for it. So they go and they go into very risky behavior, which is not good for them. So it has multiple impacts for sexual and reproductive health. And of course, economic impact in case of domestic violence. We've seen that women are kind of, you know, not supported. They're thrown out. And then they have to look after their children. They have to look after themselves. And they don't really have the wherewithal in many, many cases that they are able to actually move ahead. So they end up living in those violent situations. So it is like women will reach out to you, but they're still in the violent situation and they're not ready to move out of it because really their choices are so limited. And, you know, the children, I wanted to say here about domestic violence in particular, that the children are the hidden victims. We don't talk about them that much, but what we have seen is that women will come in and the children are impacted in very many ways. If you look at it, they also have the similar mental health impact. There's anger, there's helplessness, there's a lot of guilt about the fact that they kind of take it on themselves that, you know, what is happening to my mother maybe is because of me. There's anxiety, loss of confidence, and suicidal tendencies. I mean, we've seen this in a lot of children, and not only suicidal tendencies, there's depression, and all of these end up with, you know, impacting them in ways that they are unable to carry on with normal life. So, you know, their they become withdrawn, they become aggressive, they sort of, look at how the abuser is behaving and behave like that, or they become totally withdrawn. They feel responsible. They feel like they have to care for the adult. So there is lots of issues that children are facing here. And there is, they also get physically abused in many situations like this. So the impact on children, and what happens is that when women come to us, you cannot work only with women. You have to work with their children as well, because both are so interrelated and so interconnected that if you work with one and not the other, you're not going to be able to support the woman and the child in the way they need. Now, in terms of families, I wanted to talk about families, and this is the natal family I'm talking about. There is also an impact on the natal families. Mentally, because they feel guilty that they have, in most situations, women are married off by the family, so they feel guilty that they have married them off to the wrong kind of family. There's also social pressures that, the woman can't come back if it is a case of domestic violence, and if it's a case of sexual abuse, then, there is there's all of the stigma that is attached to it. So there are lots of social pressures on the family, whether or not they're even going to talk about, report or talk about this issue. And then the economics of it also, if women come back in case of domestic violence, then what happens? They have to look after the women and their children, and maybe they're not in a situation to do so. Even when they're in a situation to do so, we find most of the time, because of the social pressures, women are not really supported even by the natal families. So then when we look at what are the kind of services that women need, looking at the impact, when there's a mental health impact, there's a social impact, there's a physical impact, there's an economic impact, all of these have to be then looked into when we are going to give services. So each service, as I said, has to be tailored to the need of the woman who has come to us, right? So each one is a unique woman. Her case is unique. What is happening to her is unique. How she will respond to it is different from how somebody else might respond to it. So we have to tailor-make those services to her needs. And we also have to coordinate different services, because an individual, a woman does not know where she can go to get different kinds of services. So the coordination also, I'm talking about us as advocates for these women, we have to coordinate those services so that she is able to, be able to move ahead in whichever way possible in her life and stand on her feet and get over this huge impact that is happening and the huge social struggle that she's in. So I think we need to be very clear about the fact that it is very unique, and we have to give support, but in a holistic manner. And, when we look at survivors, we don't look at them only as, we don't say they're victims, we look at them as survivors because they have survived before they come to us, right? And we look at how they're going to take that journey from being survivors to becoming agents of change themselves. That is how the spectrum with which the support needs to be given. So now if we look at the mental health support, it is at an individual level as well as at the group level. And one of the things you need is, of course, first of all, counseling. And this counseling can take place either over the phone, you need hotlines, and face-to-face counseling, where you sit with the woman and you basically, as an advocate, as a caseworker, you're sitting with her and trying to understand what happened, to support her, to tell her there's somebody out there who's looking out for you, and that what is happening to you should not be happening, because most of the time women don't even get the message that what's happening to them is wrong. They're told to adjust and they're told to keep quiet. So depending on what the situation is, the families will usually say either let's not complain, let's not talk about it outside, or, don't take action. So we need to tell them what's happening to them is wrong. And so the counseling is a big part of the support that they get. And then therapy, because a lot of women who will come will need professional therapy because of the impact that they're facing, and psychiatric support, because we have like a three-way system where if the woman needs therapy, she goes to therapy, and if not, then you have to link her with psychiatrists who will be able to support her, because as I said, there is a spectrum of mental health impact, and if it is to a degree where the woman is suicidal, who's harming herself, harming her children, then you need to have somebody, you need to have link her with the psychiatric support. So mental health, I think, is a major component of the support that a woman needs. And that's the first step. Before anything else, we really need to have that support for her so that she knows there's somebody who is there for her and who will stand by her. Because often, as I said, it's the first time she's being told what's happening to her is wrong. And the second area is also creating a support network for the mental health support in a group in the sense that when women are being abused, they're very isolated, right? They are kind of their support networks are cut off. So one of the things that you need to do is build that support network again. And support groups are a great way where they can share what is happening to them and understand that I'm not the only one who's facing violence. Different forms of violence women are facing at different points in time. When they come together and they share what's happening with them, they realize they're not alone, there are others. And when they see other women who have been able to overcome, what has happened to them, then they get enthused and feel like, yes, I can also overcome. There is a way out. So these support groups are really important. And I've also put a few other things which came as a result of the work that we were doing with survivors. We are always guided by what happens to women, right? What is it that they want? And one of the things that was very interesting was anger management, because women said, we're really angry. And when this anger comes out, it comes out in a way that is not healthy for me. And a lot of the anger comes out on the children. So how do we manage ourselves? And so anger management became one intervention that we came in. And the other was parenting, single parents. How do we bring up our children? The children are also oftentimes blaming the mother for getting out of a relationship. So how do you build that? How do you parent as a single parent? So that became a need again, which was supported. And then, intergenerational workshops where we brought children and mothers together, because those were also, the relationships were pretty bad because the mother was suffering, the child was suffering, and they needed a gap. So oftentimes women want to kind of, whatever they have lost, they want to get back from the child. So the expectations are really high. How do we meet these expectations? The child also needs to grow up as a child. So these workshops are to bring them together. And then understanding mental health in a positive manner. What is positive mental health? To realize that, our mental health is pretty stigmatized in our society. So how do you destigmatize it and talk about mental health, positive mental health, and how do you develop that positive mental health? So these are some examples. There are many more, but I put those in. And of course, the more kind of what we are mostly here, what we know are definitely things that are required. One is a shelter. Oftentimes, if women lose a home, they need shelter. So what are the kinds of shelters which we can, either they are NGO shelters, then there are government shelters. And now you also have one-stop centers where there is shelter for a few days, which is from the government. And then, so shelter is one big area that support is required. But often we find that, we encourage women to find shelter within their families. Because if you remove women from the community and into a shelter home, then they lose that family support and the community support. So as far as possible, to support them to, work with their families to get them back home to their natal families if it is domestic violence. So that is one area that I think we need to also look at, because shelter homes are few and far between, and the quality of the shelter homes are, women will not stay there after a while. So we need to look at that. The other thing is, of course, medical care. I mean, if there's physical abuse and if there is sexual abuse, you need medical care. So hospitals, how do we support women to go there to get all of because women don't have an idea about what needs to be done if there is abuse. So that you have to go to a hospital, that you have to get yourself seen to, you need to get a medical certificate, and how all of this will help you in later stages, not only just for your physical well-being, but also for the case if you have to register a case in the future. So medical care is a very important thing. And also, I think it was advocacy with institutions like the Women's Commission, like protection officers, because again, women are not aware, well, who is a protection officer who is supposed to be supporting a woman who is facing domestic violence in filing a case, in supporting her in various other ways, but most of the time women are unaware. So the connections between all of these different institutions also need to be done. And one of the other things which is really important is how do we negotiate with the criminal justice system? The criminal justice system is used by women, but in a very small way. Most women don't want to take cases to court or to the police. That is a fact. But when they do take it, then there is a need to support that. So when you go to the police, we know how the police behaves. So you need to be supportive of that, help her file a case. If a case needs to be filed, make her understand. I think one of the biggest things that we as advocates have a responsibility towards women is to explain to them, what does it mean if you file a general diary? What does it mean if you file a case? What will be expected of you in case you file a case? If you file an FIR, how will it proceed? What can you expect at the end of the day? Because women just don't understand the vagaries of this legal system and the time it takes. So I think that that is really important for us to explain to them that these are the steps with which you will have to go through, whether it is in the police case, whether you go to court, then how does the court function? What will be expected of you? You know, and then providing them legal aid, connecting them with legal aid services, because again, how do women pay for their legal services? So the legal aid services that the government has supports that. So it's actually connecting all of these together and explaining what it means if you go to court, what it means if you go to the police. And then, of course, there is this economic empowerment part of it, because if you are in a situation where you are not being supported, then you need to look after yourself and your children. Then a lot of the cases we find, even if women are working, they're not earning enough to support both the children and themselves. So how do you help them with that, with skill training, with referrals for employment, or helping them set up businesses, connecting them with government schemes? I think this is a really important one, because there are many government schemes that can help women. Like, a lot of the women don't even have their ration cards. So, the ration card has been taken away and kept. So how do you help them get back the ration card? There are some schemes that are there for women. Say, for example, in Bengal, you have schemes that are, 1,000 rupees a month to a woman. These kinds of schemes that are there, economic schemes are there, health schemes are there. So to connect the women with these schemes is another area. And then we talk about the services for children. Again, similar kind of services for mental health, both at the individual and group level, which is counseling. Play therapy for very little children who are less than 4 years old, and then, for the older ones, we do group therapy, psychiatric support, again, support groups for children. So they realize they're not alone. That's not only happening in their families, there are others also. And then, education, skill training, all of these also become services for children. And then for families, what we have is family counseling. And here, family counseling can happen with both the marital family as well as the natal family. Because oftentimes women will not want to, as I said, they don't want to take action against person who has abused them. So then, and especially in cases of domestic violence, so then you call the people and you talk to them and then tell them that what is happening is a crime, and whatever the woman wants, you counsel accordingly. If she wants a divorce, then you will talk to them and say, can we have a mutual divorce? If she wants to go back, then, to ensure that that violence stops, how can we do that? So the counseling happens at that level. Or if it is counseling with the natal family, to understand and to support the woman. So those family counseling, and also support groups for families, because oftentimes the natal families are under a lot of pressure. So to also have a little support system for them. So these are some of the, I'm giving a very broad, since I had only about 20 minutes, or 25 minutes. It's a very broad kind of a landscape of the kind of services that are required. But I think one is giving the services to women and the children and families, but the other is also building community support systems for women and prevention work. So building community support systems where the women live, reaching out there to members, maybe the panchayat members, if it is in the, or the groups, the self-help groups, if they are there. So you kind of create a system of support for women in the areas that they're living, or if it is a counselor or, neighbors. So you're trying to build support around where the woman is. And also to prevent violence, and also to create I think that there was, you mentioned, Vibhuti, that, changing attitudes. This was talked about, that you need to change how the community looks at this issue. So it was that changing of attitudes and awareness programs. And one big thing, I think, is working with men and boys to change their thinking and attitude. That's a huge area of work, because we are constantly talking about empowering women, but we're not talking about how men need to change. So I think that is another big area. And then encouraging creativity and building agency in the survivors. I think this is a very big area, because most women have forgotten what they're capable of and their creativity. So, using the arts, theater, music, dance, song, to be able to get them also to start taking initiatives to create awareness within their own communities and become agents of change themselves. So I think that is one other area. And I can talk about this in more detail if there are question and answers. Vibhuti, I want to know how much time I have. Do you want me to end and now start the question answer, or should I talk a little of the challenges? I can't hear you.
Yeah. Anuradha, please talk about the challenges.
Okay.
Yeah, please.
So I think one of the biggest challenges we have is women themselves having so many barriers to cross in order to pursue a course of action, right? So the first barrier that I feel is very, very difficult for us is mental. Is that, we have been so socialized to not speak up. So even getting women to speak up and to speak out is a big problem. And when they do speak, how do they want to take action or not? They go back and forth many times. Do I want to file a case? Do I want to go to court? Do I want to file a GD in the police station? They will come, they will do everything, get everything ready, have all the paperwork done, and then decide, no, I can't do it. So there is a huge problem, because their own sense of self is so depleted. They don't have the ability, like they feel like, I can't take a decision about this. And our job is actually to help them find the confidence, to help them reconnect with their confidence, with their self, to be able to take decisions about their life. So this is a very big area, because if they are not ready, if they are unable to take a decision, then really as advocates, we can't do very much. We have to have the women taking the decisions, not us. Oftentimes, the decisions that women take are what we feel not in their best interest, but that is not ours to decide. It is their life, and they have to make those decisions. So I think that is a big, sort of a barrier in actually work with women, and women being able to overcome those barriers is really a big job that we have to do as advocates, to support them and to help them get over all of these barriers to take decisions. And the other thing that I think is very, very important is very poor quality and inadequate services that are available. So the state services, whether it is shelter homes, whether it is, the healthcare system, or the legal system, whether it is the legal aid services, whether it's the police, the kind of services that women get and the kind of response that women get when they go, say, to a police station, where constantly they're told it's their fault. Why are they wanting to file a complaint? Don't they care about their reputation? So it is all about getting women not to complain and not to file cases. So it's not as if the police are there to say, okay, you have been wrong, there has been a crime, and we will take the case. That does not happen. So there's a constant issue of even getting justice but in such cases. And we are seeing that happening across even now. I mean, as we speak, it is, and for the last, 29 years that I've been working, this has been the case. There has been no real change in terms of, it is really the luck of the draw. Who is that police officer who's sitting at the desk that day? If he is sensitive, then maybe you will get something done. If not, you won't. And similarly, when you go to the court, you are dealing with the public prosecutor, you're dealing with a lawyer. All of them have the same patriarchal attitudes that are emanating in society. So you are working with people with that kind of an attitude. And then the judge who's sitting on is also similarly. Recently, I think yesterday there was a news item that the Supreme Court has wrapped the High Court, one of the High Courts, on the knuckles because they said something like, oh, widows can't wear makeup. If that is the kind of, we did a study where the judge said, okay, if a woman makes a mistake, her husband has the right to beat her. So if they are thinking like that, then how is a woman going to get justice? So that's a huge problem in the system itself. If we're looking at the criminal justice system at every level, from the police onwards to the healthcare, if you take a woman who has been sexually abused, you take her to the hospital, then in the hospital, the way in which they do the kind of the medical tests. I remember one of the cases that I had taken was, she was in tears after that, and she was a very strong woman. She said that, the way in which the medical test was done was so, she was made to stand naked with her arms out at 90 degrees. And that is the way in which they do. So there is no, there might be supposedly protocols, but those protocols are not followed. So women are it's like as if I have been sexually abused, at every level, I'm being sexually abused again and again. So it is a huge issue in terms of even, when you tell women, yes, go ahead and do a case, you also think about what they're going to have to go through and how you're going to have to support them through that process, because it is really a very disempowering process instead of being something that, and victim protection in our country is very weak. You have a law which is absolutely not in practice. So there is no protection for the victim. There is no protection for witnesses. So if you're going to be doing any cases in the criminal justice system, it's not going to really come to, if you look at the conviction rates, they're so low because they're so long drawn out, these cases, that by the time the trial happens, both the witness as well as the victim have forgotten what is going on. So that is an issue. And I think that Flavia has already spoken about the law and how poor implementation of the law. We have very good laws on paper, but in practice, those laws don't pan out. And I think that is the problem. Again, so for example, the Protection of Women from Domestic Violence Act says that women have to have an order within 60 days. It says that, women have to have access to all of these support services. But in fact, women don't, because there is no money. And I think that is another big challenge that we face, that women have no money. So if you look at the Women and Child Ministry and you look at their budget, the only place where there is money for women is when they're pregnant. Then if you look at the budget, it's like if out of 100 rupees, maybe 95 is there for children and pregnant women and lactating mothers. So as long as they're fulfilling their childbearing role, they are being looked after. After that, the rest of the women have less than 5% of the entire budget. So this is how women are actually being looked at. And I think that is a major issue that we have to constantly, and I think we should actually separate the Women and Child Ministry. I don't see why it should be Women and Child. There should be a separate ministry that's looking after issues related to women. And I think that, so that is at one level. And if you look at even the state services like the protection officers who have been appointed, the women's commissions who are now political appointees. They are not people who are actually in the field, who have had the experience. They're all political appointees. And so depending on which side the abuser is on, which party that person belongs to, that is, their responses are like that. So I think that there's a huge problem within the system, and the system needs a huge shakeup. And the budgets that are there are so pathetic for women that even if we want to, the implementation is not going to happen. Everything just remains on paper. So I think that these are some of the, overarching problems and challenges that we face when we are doing this kind of work. And for women who are survivors, it is, we are looking at these as challenges but for them, it's their life. It is something that they're going through, and they are being, at every step, they are being, they're facing hurdles. And as it is, they are facing abuse. And then on top of that, instead of getting justice, they're having to go through all of these different barriers at the social level, family level, at the societal level, where they are being blamed for everything. And then at the criminal justice system or the justice system as a whole, they're not getting any support. And so this is a huge, these are some of the major challenges that women face. I can stop here and then take questions. I think that might be better.
Yeah.
I did have a couple of, just if we have time after the questions are over, some films that we had done on reaching out to men and boys that I wanted to show. They're 30 seconds each. So if after the thing we do have time, then I'd like to show those.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for your expertise and insights on the session. Now we would like to open the floor for questions.
Yeah, I think you can stop sharing. Yeah.
I'll just do that. I'm sorry, I'm not very good at. Okay.
None of us are.
Okay.
I would again ask the participants to put in their questions in the question and answer box, or they can also use a raise hand feature for the same.
They can unmute and speak. Yeah. Hello. Hello. You can show your films, Anuradha.
Okay. 1 second. Share. So it's not showing up in the share feature for some reason.
Yeah.
It's not happening.
It's there. We can see it on the.
What can you see?
Swayam Film VOB.
Okay, so
we
how
can
do
see
I?
your desktop. We can see. Just click
But
on.
how do I?
Video, it
I
should
just
work.
click on it, is it?
Yeah.
Got it. Got it.
Yeah.
We can see it here. You can't hear. Audio is not there.
The audio is not coming?
No.
No.
No, because
Okay.
ma'am, you have used earphone, no?
Oh, I can remove it.
Yeah.
Can you hear now?
No.
No?
I think you unplug it. No.
I've unplugged it.
Achha.
So why is it not coming?
Audio is not coming.
That's a bit strange.
No, ma'am, stop
Hmm.
share and then try to share again. Yeah, share again. Then it will, in the window which pops up, the video will also pop.
Now?
क्या
No.
कुछ होगा इन्होंने?
Yes.
Yeah.
Now.
सही बन जाता ना.
Can you hear it?
Yes.
Yes, yes. Start. क्या बोला होगा इन्होंने?
अगर ये रोड से ही बन जाता ना तो बच्चों को स्कूल जाने में कोई दिक्कत नहीं होती.
जिस दुनिया में मर्द ऐसे बात करेंगे, उस दुनिया में औरतें हमेशा सुरक्षित और बराबर महसूस करेंगी. सोच बदले, बात बदलेगी. बात बदलने के लिए swam.info पर लॉग ऑन करें.
There's one more. So why isn't it popping up now?
Yeah, it's there. क्या बोला होगा इन्होंने?
सॉलिड हॉकर डालती है यार. अमित रणजी खेलता है और वो भी स्ट्रगल कर रहा है. ये पक्का इंडिया खेलेगी.
जिस दुनिया में मर्द ऐसे बात करेंगे, उस दुनिया में औरतें हमेशा सुरक्षित और बराबर महसूस करेंगी. सोच बदले, बात बदलेगी. बात बदलने के लिए swam.info पर लॉग ऑन करें.
So the idea for these was really not to do what is wrong, but to tell them how you can behave. So you're giving them an alternative way of behaving. So in a way, it kind of reaches out because it's not telling them, oh God, you guys are so terrible, but it's telling them how you can change, right? So that was the idea. And I think that it's really important for us to work with men and boys. We have one more on sexual harassment at the workplace. I can't find it just now. But, you know, it's in the similar vein, again, talking. And so you're showing how you can respect women and, you know, that women can also achieve. So that was, and it has actually worked very well. And we use it, we've got it because it's a voiceover. It can be dubbed in any language. So we have it in Hindi, in English, in Bengali. And, you know, we're using it in our communities and it's giving us a lot of traction. I think that is one big area that we really need to work on if we want to work on this issue, because as you know, it's always about how women have to deal with the violence instead of how do we stop the violence to happen in the first place and hold the men and the boys accountable and also give them a different kind of a way of looking at things. So that's why that particular campaign was. Are there any questions?
Stop sharing.
Thank you so much, ma'am. The videos were very empowering and also reflected how a society should actually function. Moving on forward, I would now call Professor Vibhuti Patel ji, our chair for the session, for her comments on the same.
Yeah, I think my most important, yeah, you ended with such an empowering note. This film should be shown more to the men in decision-making bodies because they are the ones who come out with extremely misogynist statement. I remember talking about gender-responsive budgeting in a gender resource center where the principal secretary says that if we start building, we don't want to apply for Swadhar for money. And that is what I think whenever we fight for more allocation to combat gender-based violence, this is what we are told, that where are the proposals? First learn to utilize the money funds allocated for it. Because Ministry of Women and Child Development, only 2/3 is utilized. 1/3 is not utilized. Nirbhaya fund 1,000 rupees per year. Right from 2013, hardly 4-5 states have sent proposal. Mizoram is the best one because in terms of utilizing. Others are 30%, 20%, 10%, 5% utilization you see. So it is basically the bureaucratic lethargy and the misogyny of the bureaucrats, because he told me that if we start having Swadhar homes, all Gujarati girls will start running away from him. This was the same argument 100 years back man had used when Bapnu Ghar was established in Mumbai. All the Gujarati elite, they said that now you have a Bapnu Ghar, all the families will break down and women will start running to Bapnu Ghar. No? But that was the first shelter home. That also happened because of the social reformers like Pushpaben Mehta, who really worked, who did the work on the suicide report and who forced the British authorities in 1935 to come up with what were the reasons why so many women were committing suicide. That is called suicide report. And this is, so I think this change in the mindset has to be on people in power. It is more important, then only the change will happen. So the bureaucrats, police and judges, all three of them, I think need to have this thing. Because in the 80s, we had such a rigorous training program. It was a part of syllabus of Police Academy, IAS, the syllabus, and also the syllabus of the local level bureaucrats and all, as local self-government bodies. Now you don't see gender-based violence as a part of the training in the syllabi of this thing. And all those officers have retired. The young officers don't have any idea of the issue and how to deal with it.
I think that you need to work on both sides, Vibhuti, both at the bureaucratic level as well as the young boys who are growing up who need protection. So you need to do that. And older people, to be honest, I'm thinking gender sensitization doesn't work with people who are much older. I think we need to work more on what are the standard operating protocols. I don't care if a police officer is sensitized or not. I care if he does his job or not. He has to be told that if a woman comes with a case, you have to register it. It doesn't matter what you think, but you've got to do. That is probably where we are at this point in time. Otherwise, sensitization at that level doesn't seem to work.
Accountability as along with that,
exactly.
Sensitization and accountability. Yes.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for such a great conversation. It was very empowering. Now, moving forward, we have Dr. Suneha Kandpal ji, Senior Consultant, International Center for Research on Women, Gender Integration Consultant, Global Center for Gender Equality. We welcome you, ma'am. The floor is yours.
Please don't call me Suneha Kandpal ji. You can just call me Suneha. I would like to thank Professor Vibhuti Patel and IMPRI for this wonderful opportunity. And I really enjoyed Ms. Anuradha's presentation, especially the videos, really, because, last 4 or 5 years, I've been working on men and masculinities, and this whole idea of positive masculinities is something that is very, very important. And my PhD topic was on juvenile sex offenders. So this whole idea of, altering this whole notion of, hegemonic toxic masculinity that needs to be the way they view women in general, the worldview, that really needs to be altered. And I think this is the way to go, because like you said very rightly that, we are empowering our women, but men are seriously lagging behind. And I also see a lot of backlash, because it's like, oh, you've gone this far, now you see what I can do. Because the structural issues remain the same. The systems remain the same. So they still have, an edge over women, even if you're moving ahead. So I think there's a lot of structural violence also that we have to talk about. And unfortunately, like every presentation or seminar or webinar, if you attend on violence against women, it's like a deja vu, and then you see, okay, probably the issue that I'm going to talk about or that I'm working on has the same issues. So I will present on trafficking. This is one issue I worked some years back, and it's actually a very difficult domain to work on, because one of the main issues here is that although everybody knows that trafficking is a pandemic, actually because it's a global problem, but there's hardly or very limited funding around it. There's very limited discussion on the issue. What exactly are the issues that are plaguing, and especially in context of India, the work on trafficking somewhere, is skewed in favor of rescuing. Rehabilitation, again, is very questionable. But, this idea of how and why is it stemming, where is it stemming from, and why is it perpetuating is something that we really need to discuss. So my initial slides are basically explaining what exactly is human trafficking. So as the definition says, there were a lot of conventions, and Palermo Convention was like one of the most instrumental conventions that defined trafficking and helped a lot of countries, especially India also, to form its laws around it. Although we are still struggling with actually framing a proper streamlined law on that. And our previous law is still very archaic, if I can use that word. So basic trafficking is basically, if we focus on the act, it is recruitment, transportation, transfer, harboring, individuals, persons, it could be men, women. Now, there's a lot of awareness on gender identities, varied gender identities, and children, by use of threat, force, coercion. And coercion is, again, not just physical coercion, a lot of psychological, emotional coercion, abduction, fraud, where the trafficker or the person who has recruited the individual uses the power, abuses the power, and lures them by giving payments or benefits. But then the end result is never really known to them, as to where exactly are they going to land. Like in a lot of the survivors would say that, we were told that bahut achhi naukri milegi, you'll get very good job, and we'll take you there. And then they move from the place of origin to there's a transit, and then there is the destination. Till that time, they have no idea. And a lot happens between these three phases of the whole trafficking process. So the purpose, again, is on sexual exploitation, forced labor, slavery, and there is an increasing debate now on the fact that there's a lot of removal of organs. This whole idea of organ trafficking has also really come up. This is the global statistics on, the burden of human trafficking, which is there on a global level. I'll not discuss too much into it. If you see the Indian context, so between 2018 to 2022, 10,659 cases were registered again. But we have to understand that there is a gross underreporting of these cases. People, first of all, don't come forward. And there are a lot of times where families themselves are involved. So then again, the reporting becomes very, very difficult. So these are the reported cases, and these kind of rocketed, especially after COVID. During COVID and after COVID, it became really bad, especially for children who lost their parents. They had nobody to take care of. The scenario became very bad. And if we look at the statistics, among these, majority of them are women and girls, which is around 60%. And among the overall, spectrum of those who are trafficked, 48% are children. So children and women, again, become a grossly exploited and oppressed category among this. And the conviction rate, if you see, is again really abysmal, which is just 19.4%, which was around 1,000 and some 34 cases in 2022. Because again, the cases are so long drawn. The whole system actually acts in favor of the accused or the trafficker than the survivor. Also, one of the biggest problems is, and this is from the field experience that I had, that see, trafficking happens in a very organized fashion. There are other stakeholders involved. What you see is a spotter, is the person who has bought somebody or brought them from their place of origin to the destination. So they are the ones who are caught, and they are quote unquote small fries. But the larger structure that supports trafficking really goes absolutely they are not penalized. They don't even come to light. So, it becomes, it is actually a very difficult battle then. Because there is a lot of power involved, and they are pretty powerful people. And once somebody, for example, I spoke to a lot of women who were trafficked, and they would say that from day one, when they enter, say, for example, into sex trade, and here I'm not conflating it with sex workers who voluntarily do this work, because often trafficking is conflated with sex trafficking or sex work. So they would say that from day one, they are psychologically brainwashed and coerced into believing that now that they've come here, there is no going back. They cannot go back. Nobody is going to accept them. So their whole motivation to move out of it also takes a beating. And then there is so much surveillance that you cannot really move. Every move is surveilled so badly. Like when we used to talk to these women, the in charge there would not say anything to us. They would allow us to talk to these women, and they would just come and offer tea to us and give a very darting look to the woman or the child who's talking to us, which would just make them freeze, and they would understand that I cannot divulge, beyond a certain point. So it's a very it's a very paranoid kind of an atmosphere for them, where there is no light at the end of the tunnel. There are certain myths and misconceptions we have regarding human trafficking, and we think that it only exists in developing or poor countries, which is not the case. It's like I said, it's globally. There's a global burden to it. There only foreign born or poor people are trafficked. No, but then from any class, gender, age, anybody can be trafficked. Human trafficking is only sex trafficking. This is again another myth, but it can extend to forced labor and slavery and a lot of other forms. Human trafficking and human smuggling are the same. Now, so there's a difference here. Human trafficking again has an aspect of taking somebody by deceit. They are not aware of what is going to happen. Eventually, at the end of their journey from one place to the other. Whereas when you talk of human smuggling, they're basically migrants who are looking for a better life, and they basically cross borders. It's mostly you cross the national borders, you violate the immigration laws, but then the destination that you're going to. The journey, of course, is perilous, and it can again also turn into trafficking. But then again, we have to understand that human trafficking and human smuggling is still, they're very different. And again, like I said, I've just covered this before. Human trafficking victims will attempt to seek help in public, which doesn't really happen because there is so much of surveillance. They don't have the agency. There's a lot of control, and it's very difficult for them to speak and seek help. Also, they are not even aware whether there are laws, whether there are mechanisms where I can go and ask for help, or there is any legal redressal, where I can file a complaint and, have at least some kind of a legal proceeding or a hearing for the violence that I faced. Now, these are the phases of trafficking. So like I said, there's a place of origin where, the spotters, they are called the spotters, for marriage, as a marriage proposal, for, job, or in a lot of tribal communities. Like we had gone to this border in Tripura. It's Bollineni, which also is very near to Bangladesh. So it is very interesting. So there are a lot of men from Haryana who had come there, and they were purchasing young girls for marriage, and then they are taken back, and the whole household kind of sexually abuses them. And after the child is born, a lot of women were being sent back. So this is also a form of trafficking. So somewhere with a lot of newer forms coming up, there is also a discussion at the global level to expand definition of trafficking, right? So that Bollineni place was the place of origin. in transit was, say, Samastipur, where, you're taken from one state to the other. There's a place where you stop for a bit, and the destination is, say, Karnal in Haryana. So this is how it actually operates. And Jharkhand among the tribal population is one of the highest source in India. Then, Andhra and Telangana are both source and destination. Like, for example, New Delhi is a source. Maharashtra and Karnataka are destination states, and so on and so forth. Northeast, West Bengal, and Northeast, especially in the Sundarbans, with a lot of climate change which is happening. The villages are getting eroded, and there's hardly any livelihood. The government also doesn't care. So, there is a rampant trafficking which is happening there, but this is something that really has to be dealt with on a very large scale. And these are some of the, reasons for which trafficking happens. Like, they pose as somebody who's a benefactor. A family member, again, like I said, is involved, and therefore carrying forth reporting becomes very, very difficult. False promises are made, jobs, marriage. So these are largely the reasons which are there. If you look at the cause, see, it's like a vicious cycle. I move from one difficult circumstance to the other, or probably more difficult circumstance, and then I get sucked into it, and there is no coming back from there. For like, a lot of women would say that in that same place, for example, the women who were sent back to their village from Haryana, they said that we have been so-called quote unquote rescued, but we want to go back, because at least I was getting a stomach full meal, and I had a roof on my head. And here the situation is very bad, and the amount of social stigma that is attached, for all you know, I'll have to render sexual services for free here, because now there's a tag of a loose woman. So it's a very murky, very, very murky cycle, where your caste, your class, gender-based discrimination, it's parents, and it has a lot to do with power. So children and women structurally have very limited or no power at all. So the people in power decide for them. So children are sent off, and among them, girls are mostly sent off for earning better livelihoods. Nobody bothers to find out where exactly are they going, in what condition will they be living. The monetary aspect is something very, very alluring. Then there are also very interesting community-based prostitution practices. I worked with one such community in Mandsaur, Ratlam, and Neemuch belt. They are called Bachras. So Bediyas and Bachras. Bediyas, I'm sure you would have heard of. And it's so they have this practice of practicing sex work. It's a traditional thing. So when a girl comes to age, say about when she's 8 or 9, she's asked that, will you be staying with your bua, learning the tricks of trade and getting into sex work, or would you like to get married? And there's a bride price. Now, marriage comes with its own set of violence and a lot of drudgery. So, quote unquote, the girls are quote unquote given a choice to decide which of the lesser evil they want to choose. And the girls which choose to go with the bua or practice sex work are sent for training. And then now these girls are also trafficked out of state, and sometimes internationally also. So, so trafficking is not just out of country, but within country also. So it can be intrastate and or intercities also. Poverty, again, is another reason. Natural calamities like floods, famines, COVID, the pandemic that we had, it was disaster for children, especially those who lost their families, and they became very easy prey to be trafficked or, taken away in the name of some benefactor claiming as family, and, used for sexual exploitation or forced labor. Displacement and dislocation, like what is happening in Sundarbans, is one of the reasons. So these are the push factor. Now I go to a equally difficult circumstance, which kind of sucks me in, and it's very difficult to come out of it. So both these factors, are complementary. One leads to the other, and it creates a very, it's like a catch-22 situation. There is another thing here, like a lot of women would say that, now when they buy us, they always start counting that, you are free to go if you pay this amount. So then you fall into that same cycle of paying them back, which never really ends, If we talk of the legislative framework, our constitution definitely prohibits trafficking of a person. We have a very, I don't know, very confused law on trafficking originally, which was ITPA. And it typically conflated immoral traffic with sex work. So even if it was voluntary, it was conflated as something that the woman has been trafficked. And it's actually also very, there's not much clarity in its implementation. So there's a lot of focus on rescuing underage girls, rescuing those who don't want to be a part of it. And the rehabilitation then becomes very, very institutional, that you go to shelter homes or swadhar homes that they would call it. And from there, the ultimate aim is repatriation. I'll come to why this is a problem. So this particular act, there was a lot of debate, and now the government in 2016 actually came with an alternative exclusive bill on trafficking of persons that included forced labor and other forms of slavery also under its gambit. But then it's still, it was last presented in 2021, and there's still debate going on. So it's not solidified yet, and it has its own share of issues that I'll be talking in the next slide. There are criminal laws also. The section 370 especially happened after the Nirbhaya tragedy. And the Nirbhaya Act, as it was called, that also spoke about human trafficking of women and children and various forms, starting from sexual exploitation to slavery. And typically, Nirbhaya Fund is what is allotted, to women and children and men who are, rescued from trafficking. But then again, like Professor Patel said, that half the time these funds are not really spent, and it's not even clear that out of the amount that is allotted, how much is allotted for trafficking survivors, for their compensation or their upkeep of the shelter homes. And so it's a very muddled water out there. Then you also have Bonded Labor Abolition Act, you have Child Labor Act, Goa's Children Act, that was specially to curtail pedophilia there. POCSO is also a recent addition to that. So somewhere there are frameworks, but then it is so disjointed, all these legislations are very disjointed. They don't work, they don't converge together at a point to systematically attack or deal with the problem of trafficking. They're all, it's like hanging in different spaces at different places, but there is no convergence which is happening. Like I said, according this since IPC is now called Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita, they have section 109 and 110. They call it the organized crime. The definition again is very, it's vague, because what happens here is they're also in these particular sections, they're also targeting people who abet any kind of migration or forced human smuggling. So then it becomes a problem, because there are a lot of people who migrate out of will. There are no jobs. My family, I have to feed my family. I have to move out from that village to a city. Now somebody who's helping me becomes the abetter, and probably I am the victim. So my from a rights perspective, my whole agency is taken away. And if a migration is happening, that is criminalized. So this becomes a major problem here. The law that I said, this particular law is good in a way where it talks about stricter punishment for traffickers. It talks about how a separate national level investigation agency will be formed. Although we do have a provision of anti-trafficking units, and it is there in every state. But the problem is that if an FIR is filed, most of the times they're treated as petty cases. रेस्क्यू कर लिया, सबसे पहले उसको किसी स्वाधार होम में भेज दो, is the standard operating procedure which is followed. The ATUs are not informed, they are not taken into loop to do a thorough investigation. So the gap, the problem starts from there itself. So here they are talking of national level investigation agencies, but it is not very clear how is it going to converge with the anti-trafficking units. The good thing is that they talk about all forms of trafficking, but again, forced migration also somewhere gets, criminalized. Rehabilitation fund for all is there, and like all the other programs where we have compensations, the implementation is something which is seriously lacking. Now, when we see the gaps and concerns, see, India comes under the as a tier 2 country because as a signatory, it has laws and legislations in place, but then it does not do enough to combat trafficking head on. So it is still in tier 2. This issue needs a multidisciplinary approach. First of all, you need to have a very solid database, a very, very solid gender aggregated database to understand the gravity of the problem, to see what exactly is happening. There are, there's an real absence of robust tracking mechanisms to see that where is the population moving. So this is one of the biggest lacuna. There is, like I said, there is absolutely inadequate investigation, and with the advent of digital technology, there's a lot of cyber crimes that are happening, and sometimes you don't even need to be moved from one place to other, and you can still be sexually exploited. So this particular new form of violence that is emerging also has to be seen. There is also, a lack of implementation, like when any kind of trafficking happens, or if suppose there's a report of an underage girl in a particular setting, in a say a brothel setting, the typical procedure is to inform the anti-human trafficking units, and then they are trained to conduct the rescue operations. But what usually happens is the police goes, and there's often a conflict between the AHTUs and the police as to who's going at what time. So among, in this infighting, the survivors they lose time, and they become prone to more violence, because then the thing is that you informed, or you were in connivance with somebody, and then the surveillance and the violence, the gravity of it increases. Like there were young girls who would say that to punish us, they cut us and they stuff it with chili powder. They stuff chili powder in our vaginas. It's that brutal. So this confusion between who's the agents, interagency confusion really has to go. There's a lot of secondary victimization of survivors, especially those survivors who were rescued from sexual exploitation or who were there for sex trafficking, because there is a labeling that happens. In one of the shelter homes, we spoke to a lot of girls, and at that time in Bombay, a lot of bar girls were rescued, quote unquote rescued. Some were of course trafficked, but some were there willingly. But the whole environment of the shelter home was so stifling, so stigmatizing, that more than half of the girls were, suicidal. And, when you are rescued also, or you run away, or within the setting, when you are within the setting, there is so much trauma that happens, that once you move out, there is a lot of PTSD, complex PTSD that, the survivors suffer. And there is no mechanism to even talk about that. Forget about having trained professionals to deal with it. Nobody talks about that also. So there is a lot of poor infrastructure within the shelter homes. The staff is not trained how to handle these women and children. There's so much of stigmatization that happens. And the laws, as we say, as I said before, are all there, but there's no proper implementation. Now, what is the way forward? First of all, we really need to work on the normative issues. We really need to work on norms around, normalization of violence, norms around how, about a woman making decisions for herself regarding decision making, autonomy, agency. All these have to be spoken about. We have to talk about gender-based violence, poverty, and how they all intersect together, So there has the debate, the efforts have to be multidisciplinary and intersectional. So a man is trafficked, a woman is trafficked, right? They have identities as a caste, their caste identities, their class identities. And then on the top of it, there is gender identity. So me being a woman then adds to a disadvantage, a bigger disadvantage compared to a man who's trafficked. And if you're a child, you are absolutely powerless. That adds to further marginalization. So we have to talk in these lines. There is hardly, so there's a lot of effort which is there on rescue, rehabilitation, and repatriation, which I don't, which has been proved, in fact, in a lot of studies that it doesn't really work, because you tend to go back again, because you are not changing the structural conditions, you're not changing the root of it. And when they come back, there's a lot of stigma around it. So there is a need to work on prevention, which is not being done. But with prevention, there has to be a very strong community focus to it, right? So that needs to be, you need to have these community observers. Community needs to be aware. There's a lot of, there's a need for, a lot of social behavior communication around this particular problem. Political will is very, very important. The higher ups, the policy makers who make the law, who make the legislation, who plan these budgets and all, they really need to be sensitized. They have to understand. They have to be aware of the real context, which is absolutely missing. The legal aspect is not victim friendly. It's not victim centered. Again, it skews towards a very punitive approach that punish them, but what happens to the victim or the survivor, that nobody talks about. There needs to be fast track courts, separate courts for hearing of trafficking cases, because then these cases are so long drawn out that the survivor by that time is either too exhausted to pursue the case, or she becomes hostile. There's so many things that happen between that time. So and then you see a very abysmally low conviction rate. Mental health and psychological counseling, these has, that this particular system has to be robust. One has to, it's like a must, where these issues, the mental health problems that they go through, it starts with PTSD, complex PTSD, depression, anxiety, and a lot of other issues. They really need to be dealt with, because when they go back, it becomes very difficult for them to adjust also. So, if you have these systems in place, the whole rehabilitation process also becomes relatively smoother. Sensitization I've spoken about. A very strong community-based rehabilitation programs have to be there. And most importantly, there has to be a robust collaboration between various stakeholders, because what happens is NGOs are doing their work, the government is doing their work, and there are other legal bodies which are doing their work, but there's no convergence actually happening. So everybody has to come together to have a more multidisciplinary, multidimensional program, starting from prevention to the last point of rehabilitation. So that is the end of my presentation, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, ma'am, for such an insightful session and sharing your expertise with us. We would now like to call Vibhuti ma'am to share her comments for the same.
Yeah. I think a very important presentation, and I think the NGO, very few NGOs are working in this area of trafficking. But what is your understanding on the cooperation with the Bombay Feminist had along with the police, which was called Operation Help, when the girls, underage girls from Kamatipura, they were like taken out from the clutches of procurers and pimps, and they were means they were sheltered in 13 shelter homes. The whole thing, the process documentation has taken place from the participatory action approach by College of Social Work. And some of the girls, like it is the shelter home, one of the shelter homes, St. Catherine's home, is just opposite my house. So I was also one of the volunteers. But on the whole, what do you think about such this thing? Because there was a political will. The principal secretary, Madam Iyer, she insisted with the chief minister and government of Maharashtra that it is the duty of the state to look after, because these girls did not trust their parents or relatives. Even in front of court, they would come and hug us. They don't send me. They are not. He's not my uncle. He's a pimp. Or I don't. They will again sell me. And then finally, government of Maharashtra took it up. It's a high budget rescue operation they had. And 13 shelter homes for more than 40 colleges of Bombay University, SNDT. They came out, then massive program of open school and the educational, volunteers, thousands of volunteers were women in the educated women were into Teach One, Each One program. But do you think it is doable elsewhere?
So this particular model actually works because one, it is participatory. There are a lot of stakeholders involved. My only concern then is around the long-term rehabilitation. Sometimes with all the good intentions, the best of intentions, we actually tend to overlook, or there's an oversight of the longer repercussions or the long-term rehabilitation. So for how long will these children stay in the shelter homes? Are the shelter homes equipped infrastructurally to, work with these children, to rehabilitate them emotionally, psychologically, educationally, and maybe eventually financially? So the long-term plan is something which is lacking, if I can say, because at that time, yes, it's in the best interest, and the children were just not handed out to anybody, because often, like I said, the parents also sell the child. But then when they are in a shelter home, it is still a protected environment for them. But then what after the shelter home? Also, how frequently are these shelter home audited? What is the monitoring mechanism of these shelter homes? We saw what happened in Muzaffarpur, the TIS report that came out, and a horrific exploitation of girls that was happening. So my concern with institutionalization of rehabilitation is that. And I think the best way to go is to have a community-based rehabilitation, which actually will go a long way. Yeah.
But if the victim or survivor doesn't want to go back to community, especially the girls from Nepal and girls from certain pockets in Hyderabad, they did not want to go. They just said, we will not go to the people. Again, we will be sold. So what do you do?
Actually, Professor Vibhuti was my DAC member, so I have a habit of saying ma'am. So ma'am, the thing is that whether you are, so community doesn't mean your native community. Community could be the immediate community or so if I am, say, suppose rescued in Bombay and I don't want to go back to Nepal, within Bombay, is there a safe community space for me where I can go back? Like, you have these, there's this wonderful concept of aftercare homes. So once you go out from a shelter home, you go to an aftercare home, they equip you with those skills to assimilate in the so-called quote-unquote normal environment. And you are you are given with those life skills, with those financial skills to go back and independently live your life. So in these cases, what I meant with community-based programs was the fact that the community as a whole needs to be sensitized, has to be on board, and a safe space needs to be created. Not necessarily in their native place, because
biological family or the
Yeah,
kinship
absolutely.
network. Yeah,
place
correct.
of origin. Yes, correct.
Yeah,
correct.
those experiments are there. Prerna has done and the Girl Power
Yes,
has done.
yes.
So there are many such organizations in
There
city
is
of
a very
Mumbai
nice
also, yeah.
community-based program which is run by an organization in Nepal. So they are also doing a lot of work there. So for example, Maitri Nepal does a lot of rescue work. You know, they are literally in hiding near Kali River, and then they are rescuing. But then, you know, they after say 6 months, the girls are again en route for trafficking. So again, we have to look at the longer, or you know, these efforts become very myopic. It has to be in a long term. Sustainable models of rehabilitation is something that we really need to work on.
Yeah. After 18, when they are not legally allowed to be in the shelter home, before that the pre-planning has to be there.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for such an enlightening session and educating us about how the harsh realities of the society need the community to come together and to work forward for the individuals who face the violence and the women who face the violence and the discrimination that they face. Moving on forward, we have our question and answer session. I would like all the participants to again follow the guidelines. That is, you can either put your question in the Q&A box, or you can take use of the raise hand feature for the same.
Yeah. Today everyone is quiet. Otherwise, they have so many questions and
so
sharing also.
Either the presentations were very good, or probably everybody got bored.
I had a question.
Yeah.
I had a question to Suneha, ma'am. So, ma'am, when a community comes together, but then the community, when there's an institution which is below, there's an organization which is, you know, as Vibhuti ma'am pointed out, that what if the girl doesn't want to go back or doesn't want to go back into the community? So that takes a lot of toll on it. So being a girl, I would just ask this. I was very curious about this. So that would also take a very big amount of toll on the mental health. Like, so how will the communities, you know, could you just give us an example, like how can the communities move further and uh, stabilize the process for us to accept coming back to the society? So how will that be a possible thing, and especially in India, because the society is what, you know, rules. So yeah.
Right. Unfortunately, I don't have too many positive examples, but yes, one I do remember.
Yes.
So this particular girl was rescued from GB Road in Delhi, and the way the whole process was excruciating, and then what she went through was again very, very painful. The good part with her case was that it was her brother who was instrumental in her rescue. And you know, the anti-trafficking unit of Telangana is very, very active, and Andhra, they're pretty active. In fact, in GB Road there's a terror कि आंध्रा की लड़कियां नहीं आएंगी, उनको उठा के लेके जाते हैं. So this is the thing. But then when they moved to the village, no, so there's a lot of stigma, so much so that people will not come to your house to have a glass of water also, when they clearly know that it was a village lady who took her there, sold her off, and she's still there in the village. But there was a local organization this was a place called Kadri, which is about 4 or 5 hours away from Bangalore, and it's called Reds. At that time, it was Reds, and they used to work with the community. They used to, you know, sensitize the community about what is trafficking, what can happen if somebody comes to you with a marriage proposal or a job. You have to do a thorough checkup, or you come to us, we'll help you. The local police, you know, they involve the local police also. So the local police would also go to each home and kind of reassure if somebody who was rescued came back to the village, they would reassure, they would have meetings at the panchayat level. And then at a very public forum, the survivor would be welcomed back to the home. But then, so while these measures were taken, and then she was integrated into the mainstream and she was going to school. Last I heard, she completed her college also. But so these are some of the ways. But then again, this is a very long drawn work, which this particular organization was willing to do. And so you have to somewhere break the status quo. So when I decide to sell my daughter for whatever reason, or sell my child, this whole norm of using a particular gender or child as a commodity, this has to be altered. So this is also a form of violence that the family is putting the child or the woman through. So there has to be a lot of normative work around gender-based violence that really needs to be spoken about. Yes, there are issues about poverty and all, but then, somewhere, if we start at least working at the normative level, roping in the community structure, the panchayats, the local police, somewhere at least some amount of stigma is reduced. And like you said, like the mental health aspect, unfortunately, she did not get a very robust form of counseling. So, after she came back, she had very severe PTSD symptoms of nightmares, and she would have night terrors. And, she said that there's a certain smell, agarbatti ka smell, that would just, put her to a panic attack. She would just start, she would go into a severe anxiety attack. So, these mental health, like I said, is a neglected area, and it has to start from the point of rescue till the end. But then, that will take a lot of time. And here the organization, the NGOs play a very, very important role. But then again, one of the major issues again is, like in Sanskrit, they say, Sarve Guna Kanchanama Shrayanti. You need funds, you need money. And at the global level, you have to advocate for money to be pumped into this issue. Why the organizations, I'm very sorry to say, why the organizations are not working, because there's hardly any funding in this. In Eastern Europe, it's full of organizations that work on trafficking because there is money being pumped there, But here, it's very limited money. In Nepal, yes, you have a lot of organizations and there is a lot of funds which is happening. So it's again, like I said, it has to, there has to be a multi-pronged approach, starting from funding. And of course, the political will is very, very important, because it's not that the government doesn't have the money or the structure. There is absolute lack of will to do anything.
Correct. That's my experience also of training of bureaucrats, IAS officers, IPS officers, and also the elected representatives, in the local self-government bodies. Yeah, I think they have written that question and they are not allowed to write questions. So one person has written, Shrija has written in the chat box. So Shrija, you can unmute and speak. Hello. Yeah. Shrija? Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Ma'am, it was a very detailed and beautiful presentation. And ma'am, my question is, ma'am, how can we analyze the intersecting vulnerabilities this trafficked women face, and what could be the possible solutions? And ma'am, the second question is that most of the time, the sex workers don't own any government ID documents, and hence they remain out of the means they are not identified, and most of the times they can't access most of the government services also. So ma'am, and face further stigmatization, how can we address this challenge?
Okay, so you've asked me two questions. First of all is analyzing intersectional vulnerabilities. I think we need to have a very strong, so there's a lot of evidence and data gap. So that evidence and data gap has to be fulfilled with a lot of research around this issue. So when you want to see and how your intersecting identities interact with a certain social problems, that happens when there's a lot of research that goes into it. So one of the ways of documenting and analyzing the work that you've used is to have a robust, research programs. There's a lot of disaggregated data that we need, because see, when you have disaggregated data, so you will not have a blanket statistic on itne log traffic hue, but then from what community, what caste, what gender. And then when you do a lot of, this is the quantitative part of it, then you do a lot of qualitative work on it and basically understand how are these intersecting with this particular social problem. So I would say also as a researcher, I would say research is a very, very effective way to understand all these aspects.
Qualitative research, ethnography
Absolutely.
also.
Absolutely.
As they did for the Karnataka Devdasi, lot of
right,
work,
yes,
which is
right,
very
correct.
ethnographic.
So your questions on sex workers. So again, I would not conflate women who are trafficked for sex work with sex workers, because we are then taking away the whole idea of agency that I can practice sex work. And, it's not always that I'm trafficked, or it's not always that it is coerced. This is personally, I ideologically believe. But yes, in terms of not having their documents is of course a problem. But the whole point, so it's a vicious cycle, no? It's that I as a sex worker has a very limited agency in the context of the society. I as a sex worker who is voluntarily doing sex work will have at least some agency on deciding upon the occupation that I'm pursuing. But as a trafficked survivor or as a trafficked victim who's into sex work, that agency is also taken away. And the government again has a very moralistic stance on sex work as it is. So, the ITPA kind of criminalizes sex work, which a lot of women rights groups were talking about, that, you need to decriminalize sex work and, acknowledge it as sex work, where, so this is where the problem also started, that a lot of pro-trafficking groups also protested or, kind of questioned the whole idea of how much of a choice is not having a choice. So there's a lot of ideological debate, but then in terms of having the IDs and all, there is definitely, you don't exist, at least on papers, you don't exist. And this is what this is what the whole fight of decriminalization is, that, even the new law that they are making for, traffic on exclusively on trafficking, and it moves away from ITPA, is about the fact that trafficking separately has to be organized, recognized, and then, there has to be mechanisms made to deal with it. As far as stigmatization is concerned, in both the cases, it is there. Perhaps the intensity varies depending on your context. And this is, again, I would say, is a very long drawn work. It has to be, we have to go back to the communities, because see, we have to understand we all come from the society that we love to complain against, but nobody really wants to do anything. What socially happens is a reflection of our society. So we have to again go back to the community and, work on the norms. There is a huge shift in the norms which is required, which and of course, like Ms. Anuradha said, that, a lot of work with masculinities has to be done. So there are multiple ways, and of course the other measures that Ms. Kapoor and I discussed in our respective slides. This is one way to deal with stigmatization of any form of violence, for that matter. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, ma'am. Definitely. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Ma'am, Anuradha, ma'am, I had a question. I'm sorry I didn't ask it before. But the question is, like, how effective are the government policies and initiatives in addressing mental health issues and, combating violence against women and girls? And what are the improvements that are needed for better protection and support for the same? If you could give us some examples and enlighten us about the same. I'm sorry, ma'am, you're not audible.
So in terms of mental health services from the government, they're few and far between for survivors. To be honest, I don't know of any services that survivors can actually access through the government, whatever, unless they go to a government mental health space. But in terms of survivors themselves getting support, there is no such thing that I'm aware of, right? So this is a huge gap. And as I think both of us have talked about, the impact of violence on mental health is huge, no matter what form of violence it is. So this is a big gaping hole in the provision of services. The shelter, see, the one-stop centers that have been set up in certain states, not in all states, like in Bengal, again, they're set up in name, but not in actuality. So there's a lot of paperwork which will show, okay, these one-stop centers are supposed to have counseling and therapy and stuff, but they don't. So the quality and the level at which those are delivered are not sufficient to actually provide the support that is required. And like you mentioned just now, it's like you have to start at the beginning and carry on all the way through till the person actually is able to be independent and, you know, has received sufficient support. But that does not happen. So as far as government is concerned, it's not there. So in terms of what needs to be done, to be honest, if we look at all of the services that the state provides at the moment, I mentioned this earlier also, is that they're all there in writing. But in actual practice, you know, the level of service that is provided, the number of services that are provided, whether it is a shelter, whether it is mental health services, whether it is legal aid services, it doesn't matter. All of them are at a very, first of all, access is, they might be maybe in cities, and that too, not all cities. When you go down to the district level and you go down further, they're not available. So for a woman to actually access those services is very difficult. So we have been talking about, you know, you have to decentralize, you have to go, and coordination between the services don't exist either. So if a woman is approaching a police station, the policeman is supposed to tell them that there is a protection officer who will help you. Okay, or there are legal aid services that are there that for you to take, but they won't do that. So the coordination is not happening between the different state agencies and institutions. And there is no monitoring of what is going on where. So it actually is like accountability is very, it doesn't exist. Whether or not you do your work, it doesn't really matter. And as was pointed out earlier, look at what is happening inside shelter homes, right? Those shelter homes, I mean, Suneha talked about what happens in shelter homes. So the problem is that I would say, I don't want anything new to come up, right? Policies they can come up with because it's the easiest thing for them to do is write a policy and put it there. But that policy to become implemented requires money, it requires people, and it requires the people to be sensitized. So you can have a whole bunch of very, very good stuff on paper, but if it isn't translated into action, then it doesn't help, right? So this is the problem that we have. There's not enough money put in. They will just put new laws keep getting passed. And we as a movement have actually asked for laws traditionally and got laws, and pretty good laws at that. But when it comes to the implementation part of it, it's not there. So I would say no new policies. I would say really let's focus on implementation, on putting money in existing policies and existing law implementation and existing services, so that at least what is there is done properly. I think that's how I would look at it.
Yeah, but for the first time, like 740 crores were allocated for mental health services in 2021. Reason was different because of the COVID created so much of mental disturbance among everyone. But how many states apply? Only Kerala applied. Only Kerala. And that person, like I was in Kerala, and the person from the researcher from health department who had written the proposal to NIMHAS. And NIMHAS is the nodal agency. So it is not some corrupt bureaucrat who is controlling money. NIMHAS is there where there are sensitive psychiatrists and psychologists. But still state governments and union territories have not sent proposal for mental health services.
So there's
There's
another
no
thing that
awareness.
I have found. Sorry, I'll just then you can go ahead, Suneha. But the thing is, what I find is there is a battle between the state and the center. And in Bengal, for instance, every time we go and say, can we use the Nirbhaya fund, we are told we will not take central money. Now, my point is that this is not central money. It is our taxpayers who are taxpayers. We have paid taxes to the central government. That money is coming back. But they won't ask for it because it is asked. So then I said, okay, if you're not going to take that, then give us money from your state funds. But you don't have state funds. So it's political. It's also, and it always happens when it comes to women. And this has been happening in West Bengal, definitely for the last 10 years, ever since Mamata Banerjee has come. So she's basically said, A, there's no violence in our state, and B, we will not take money from the center. So this is a big problem. I mean, even OSCs have just started in Bengal after 10 years. In, I think, the last year and a half, we've had OSCs and we don't even know where they are. To take out a list of where the OSCs were, it took us more than a year. So it's...
So our experience of Dilasa is that to run one OSC, you need 1.5 crore. Just one in 1200 bedded hospital. We did that. You need, so it, and funds are there, but they are not applying for, they are not asking for it.
This is
also, how much awareness do we have about mental health? I mean, forget about community level. They are not exposed to this kind of discourse. But even amongst policy makers, I doubt if they understand what is mental health, and if depression is just like ki dhoop nahi lag rahi, to dhoop mein baith jao and depression will go. I mean, that awareness on mental health as it is not there. Also, so NIMHANS, while is a nodal agency, so a lot of times, a lot of psychiatrists are also not very oriented towards a psychosocial model of, working. So it's very medicine based. And so NIMHANS runs a lot of community based, clinics in and around Bangalore. But again, the orientation is very medical. That for everything, dawai khila do. And since they have MPhil students and PhD students who are doing psychology and psychiatric social work, they are, so psychiatric social workers are only for making income assessment, and psychologists will provide very piecemeal counseling, because obviously there are a lot of other issues also around it. But then it actually, the onus of actually implementing such programs then go to the senior most psychiatrist or the SR or whosoever is heading that particular panel. Whether he or she has a psychosocial orientation is something that needs to be also looked into, because
but the Mental Health Act 2017 has critiqued biomedical approach, no? The shows the limitations also. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. But in practice is always an issue.
And also the stigmatization, no? The whole thing of stigmatization. And in the, when we started doing work with survivors, right? This was now going back 29 years now. Right at the beginning, we realized mental health has to be taken care of. So we had an in-house therapist. And then when it was a psychiatrist, we had to be so careful, because who is the psychiatrist you're sending this woman to? What is his or her bias? That's one. And two, if there's a psychiatrist prescription, a lot of the times we found men taking these prescriptions to the court saying, she's crazy, I want divorce.
Yes.
Divorce.
So this was another thing that we had to be so careful that when we send, and they have to be reliable. And there was, we did a case with Anjali is an organization in Calcutta which works on mental health, very, very strong. They've been, very instrumental in the bill that was passed, the mental health bill, in bringing in the psychosocial aspect. And we worked with them because so many psychiatrists were just putting women into homes on the basis of the husband saying there's something wrong with her. They don't even see her. They don't even check on her. They don't even get her to their
We
clinics,
were
and
approached, yeah,
and
that
they
give
have
a
been
certificate,
yeah, they've
even
given
social
not
welfare
certificates. They were
department.
just taken in and put into that into the mental health institution, and then we had to fight to get her out. So this was it has also been happening. So there's a lot of I mean, within the mental health sector itself, there are many of these so-called clinics that are operating as drug rehabilitation centers and stuff, who are taking in people for money, literally, on the basis of some doctors who are writing out a prescription. So people are very, very, you know, there's a stigma, but also on the other side, there's a huge fear, you know, of what can happen if you have that prescription.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I staunchly agree with all the points that have been shared during the conversation. Obviously, there's a stigma and there's a very big, gap between how the awareness is being created about the definition of mental health itself. So, being the youth, we face it on a regular basis because our friends, our community, the society around us. So, even parents nowadays don't, understand the actual definition of mental health or depression or anxiety. So as ma'am rightly pointed out, in India everything is all about dawai de do and it'll be okay. So everything is not, which is, can be treated by medicines itself. That was a very good conversation, truly insightful, ma'am. And I would actually love to see some legal and policies about the same. But then, as ma'am said, policies can be made, but then the funds allocated requires implementation for the same. Surely, ma'am, I agree with your point. Thank you so much, ma'am, for such empowering session. It's always, pleasure learning from you. We look forward to have you in our future IMPRI events as well. So, ma'am, now moving forward with the formal vote of thanks. As we come to the end of the day 5 of Ending Gender-Based Violence Cohort 3 Challenges and Responses, an online national autumn school program, a 4-week online immersive certificate training course, I, Avi Sharma, a researcher at IMPRI, Impact Policy Research Institute, New Delhi, would like to propose the formal vote of thanks on behalf of the IMPRI Gender Impact Studies Center, New Delhi. We are grateful to our experts for the 5th day of this program, Ms. Anuradha Kapoor ji and Dr. Suneha Kandpal ji, for taking their valuable time and for their thought-provoking insights on the topics. We thank all our participants who have raised pertinent questions and actively participated in today's deliberation. Readings of the session have been shared in your email, and a video of the session will also be shared with you for learning. Sorry, ma'am, I skipped the closing remarks. Vibhuti,
No,
ma'am.
it's okay. Yeah, it's okay because I took part in the debates and discussions also, so that's fine. Both the presentations were brilliant and very useful, and I think so many participants have now started working on their dissertation. Some are going to make films, some are going to prepare long poetry, then some are going to have a photojournalism. So I think they seem to be more concerned about submission than discussion. I think that's the only thing I can read about. I can say about today's the silence of the participants. Yeah.
Readings of the session have been shared in your emails, and a video of the session will also be shared with you for learning. So we look forward to welcoming you for the 6th day of the certification course on 1st October 2024. That is tomorrow at 6 p.m. by experts Dr. Amar Jesani ji and Dr. Veena Vaswani ji. We are grateful if you are watching us later on YouTube, listen to us on our various podcasts, or read our publications. We hope you continue to join us for the future IMPRI Web Policy Talk and Web Policy Learning events. Wishing you all a very good evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Anuradha. Thank you, Suneha.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, good night.
Bye, good night.